He left me for another woman and promised I'd have nothing. So I let him come back to an empty lot and watch his whole life collapse. The convoy came up the dirt road like a parade that had taken a wrong turn into a reckoning. White SUVs, ribboned sedans. One of the cars was playing music, something bright and expensive and completely oblivious, the kind of song people choose when they believe the day belongs entirely to them. I was sitting 50 yards away in my father's old Ford F-250, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other on the folder my attorney Javier Salas had told me to keep within reach at all times. My sunglasses were on, my engine was off, I was completely still. When Alvaro stepped out of the first SUV and looked at the property, he stopped moving so fast it was like someone had hit pause on his entire body. The lot was empty, not almost empty, not half-cleared. Empty in a way that felt deliberate, surgical, almost theatrical, the kind of empty that announces it was built on purpose. The modular office was gone, the irrigation reels were gone, the portable generators were gone, the storage containers were gone, the event lighting poles were gone, the folding inventory tables were gone, and the decorative steel arch his new girlfriend Veronica had been bragging about on Instagram for 3 weeks, that was strapped to the flatbed trailer hitched to the back of my truck, catching the afternoon sun like a bent halo. He took 3 steps forward, like the ground might explain itself if he got close enough. His mother Carmen climbed out next, then his sister Rocio, then his cousin Sergio, each of them dressed for celebration, each of them wearing within seconds the same expression people wear in hospital waiting rooms and courtrooms, that particular blank horror of understanding that the world has reorganized itself without their permission. Veronica emerged last from the second SUV in a fitted ivory dress with a cathedral-length veil gathered carefully in her hands to keep it out of the dust. For one long, suspended second, nobody said a word. Then Alvaro looked straight at my truck and screamed, "What did you do?" I didn't answer right away. I turned the key instead. The old Ford roared awake with a sound that cut clean through the wedding music still leaking out of one of the sedans. Dust lifted under the tires in a dry golden cloud, and every face in that convoy turned toward me at once, as if the engine itself had spoken on my behalf. When the sound faded, the silence that replaced it was so complete I could hear one of Veronica's bridesmaids whisper from 40 feet away, "Oh my God!" Only then did I open the door and step out. I was wearing jeans, a black blouse, and the kind of calm that only comes after something inside you has burned all the way down to its studs and decided it prefers clarity to smoke. I took back what was mine, I said. I need to take you back 11 years because that's where this actually starts. My name is Luciana Navarro. I grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, the only daughter of a man named Rodrigo Navarro, who spent 30 years doing agricultural equipment work and never once confused access with ownership. He kept meticulous records. He labeled every box. He taught me to read a contract before I signed anything, and to never pour private money into a shared dream without a legal container around it. I thought he was being overly cautious. I was 22 and in love, and I thought caution was for people who hadn't met the right person yet. I met Alvaro Medina at a harvest season gala for a regional farm co-op association in October of 2014. He was standing near the bar in a gray sport coat, laughing too loudly at something someone had said, and he had the particular energy of a man who had decided the room belonged to him before he'd learned anyone's name. He was handsome in that blunt, confident way that reads as security when you're young enough not to know the difference between confidence and performance. We were married in 2016. For the first 2 years, things were genuinely good, or at least they were good enough that the problems looked like growing pains instead of warning signs. We were building something. Alvaro had ideas, energy, connections through his family, and an almost physical need to be seen as the person responsible for things. I had my accounting background, my organizational systems, and, when my father died in 2018 after a 2-year illness, a modest inheritance I'd been left with and didn't quite know what to do with yet. Alvaro knew exactly what to do with it. We put it into the company, he said. Not our company, the company. Like it was already a settled thing, already his, and my money was simply completing the picture he'd already painted. This is how we make something real, Lucy. This is how we stop renting our future. I thought about my father saying no woman should pour private money into a joint dream without a legal container around it. And then, following his instructions from memory, I did the one thing that would eventually save everything. I formed an LLC, Navarro Ag Solutions. Alvaro barely noticed. He was already calling vendors, already talking to suppliers, already narrating himself in conversations with his mother and his cousin Sergio, as the man building something from nothing through sheer hustle and vision. He described my contribution the way people describe the weather: ambient, impersonal, not something you thank anyone for. I told myself it was just his style, his family's culture, the way men of that generation talked about partnership. I told myself I was being oversensitive. I was very good, in those years, at telling myself things. The first red flag I actually registered, not rationalized, but registered, was a Saturday afternoon in March of 2022. I was at the modular office on the site, reconciling contractor invoices against our operating account, when I noticed a charge I didn't recognize. It was from a hotel in Visalia, $287, a Saturday night. Alvaro had told me he was at a supplier dinner in Tulare. I remember staring at the charge for approximately 90 seconds, doing the mental math of miles and restaurants and logic, before I told myself there was probably a simple explanation and closed the spreadsheet. There wasn't a simple explanation. There was just a more practiced lie. Over the the next 4 months, I noticed the pattern in the way you notice water damage, slowly and then all at once. The hotel charges appearing on a card I paid off every month. The late returns from so-called site visits that the security cameras recorded as empty. The way he started showering before Sunday dinners and calling it stress relief. The way he stopped looking guilty when he came home and started looking relieved, like someone who has successfully transferred a burden from one container to another and now feels genuinely lighter. I tried, twice, to say something. The first time, in August, I brought up the hotel charge. Alvaro looked at me with such practiced bewilderment that I felt ashamed for asking. That was for Reyes and his distributor client, he said. I told you that. He hadn't, but the certainty in his voice was so complete that I spent the next 2 weeks wondering if I had simply forgot. The second time, in October, I showed him a camera log from the site that contradicted a story he'd told about an evening meeting. He said the cameras were glitching. He got angry about the glitching cameras. By the time the argument was over, I was somehow apologizing for implying anything, and he was the wronged party. And I was back in the kitchen at midnight reconciling payroll while he poured bourbon for Sergio in the living room. I knew by November, with a certainty that lived in my chest instead of my head. But knowing isn't the same as deciding, and deciding isn't the same as moving. I kept moving. The company, the contracts, the equipment cycles, the vendor relationships, the banking, the filings. I kept the entire organism of our business alive while I spent 6 months trying to figure out what I was willing to do with what I knew. Then Alvaro took the choice out of my hands. He left on a Tuesday in January 2026. It wasn't quiet. He had done the insulting thing of staging it. His mother's car in the driveway at 9 a.m. His sister helping with bags. Sergio in the passenger seat of his truck already, as if witnesses made departure more legitimate, as if the performance of being left made him the one making a responsible decision. I stood in the kitchen. I didn't cry. My hands were shaking, but not from grief. It was more like the feeling after you've been braced against a door that suddenly gives way. The last text message he sent from the end of the driveway read, "When we come back, you won't matter in this house anymore." I read it standing next to the coffee maker with the mug in my hand. I read it twice. Then I set the mug down very carefully because something had shifted behind my sternum. Not broken exactly, but aligned. The way a bone sets after a long dislocation. It hurt, and it was correct. I called Javier Salas the next morning. Javier's office sits above a bakery on a downtown Fresno street, and the waiting room smells faintly like cinnamon and printer toner. He has been a business and family property attorney for 19 years, with a particular specialty in agricultural partnership disputes and commingled asset cases. He is quiet in the way smart people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned to let documents do the talking first. I brought 6 boxes. He said almost nothing while I unpacked them. He just read bank statements first, transfer logs, contractor invoices, warehouse lease addendums, permit applications, supply agreements, utility hookups, machinery financing records, site improvement contracts, the operating documents for Navarro Ag Solutions, the LLC formed in my name in 2018 using money from my father's estate. After 15 minutes, Javier leaned back in his chair and said, "He's either reckless or stupid." I looked up. Which? A short, humorless smile. Usually both. The good news is that he signed almost everything you needed him to sign because he never bothered to understand it. He tapped a page with one blunt finger. The equipment, movable infrastructure, temporary storage units, contract irrigation systems, modular office, service accounts, and several key site improvements are either yours directly or tied to your company. The property itself is more complicated, but the thing he's building his new life on, he let a pause do the work. That is sitting on your paper. I did not cry in Javier's office. I had already done my 10 minutes in the kitchen the night before with cold coffee and the phone glowing in my hand. After that, something in me turned practical. Practical the way grief sometimes dresses itself in work boots because it has no other choice. I said, clearly and without trembling, "I don't want a scene. I want precision." Javier nodded like I was the first sensible person he'd spoken to in days. Then we moved fast. The next 72 hours felt like emergency surgery. Every task had a sequence. Every call had a script. Every item had to be matched to title, invoice, contract, or account statement before it was moved, because I was not going to give him, or anyone he sent, a single angle to claim theft or misconduct. The law was on my side. The documentation was on my side. All I had to do was be precise. By noon on the first day, a locksmith had changed the warehouse and side storage locks. By evening, my IT contractor had revoked Alvaro's remote gate access and transferred all monitoring credentials tied to my company's systems over to accounts he couldn't touch. On the second day, the equipment haulers arrived. These were men who had worked alongside us for years. Men who had always known, in the way people on job sites always know, whose emails actually got answered and whose invoices actually got paid. They showed up with flatbeds and forklifts at 7 a.m. and didn't ask a single foolish question. They rolled out the irrigation reels, loaded the portable water tanks, detached the office trailer, drained and transported the generators, boxed the warehouse files tied to my company accounts, removed the leased climate units, stacked the inventory cages that Alvaro liked to walk past whenever investors came by, as if proximity to equipment was the same as understanding it. Nobody smirked, nobody offered sympathy. There is a particular mercy in being helped by people who understand that competence is sometimes the most respectful thing you can offer someone. I found pieces of my marriage everywhere during those 2 days. A coffee mug with a chip on the handle from our second year together. A framed photo from the first harvest contract I had personally secured. The one Alvaro told everyone he'd landed through pure hustle, when in reality I had spent 6 weeks drafting the vendor packet and making callbacks from my lunch breaks at the accounting office. A receipt folded inside a desk drawer for the first commercial-grade pump, purchased with part of the inheritance my father left me. The same money Alvaro later described to investors as capital he had risked on himself. By the third day, the place looked like a jaw with all the expensive teeth pulled out. The dirt lot remained. The permanent structural shell remained, but every movable thing that had given the site its function, its utility, its illusion of prosperity, gone. When the last crew asked where I wanted the decorative steel arch, the one Veronica had selected for her ceremony photos and announced on Instagram with 3 separate posts, I stood in the afternoon heat and almost laughed. Put it on the flatbed, I said. It belongs to my company. Carmen called 7 times that day, left 6 voicemails. In one, she said I was bitter. In another, unstable. In the third, I was embarrassing the family, which was remarkable considering the family had never once expressed embarrassment about her son planning a second wedding on another woman's assets. By the 4th message, she was demanding the return of Alvaro's office furniture, which was especially rich from a woman who once publicly thanked her son for buying her a recliner I had purchased on my Visa card, because, as she had said at the time, family should help family. I didn't answer any of the calls, not from fear, from clarity. I was done participating in conversations where facts had to audition against entitlement. I forwarded everything to Javier. It was remarkable how quickly people stopped using the word emotional once a lawyer started replying with attachments. Back at the empty lot, Alvaro was still standing in the dust, trying to locate, somewhere among the vacancy, the version of me that would eventually crack. "This is a stunt," he said. His jaw worked. His voice came out strange, high and brittle, like a glass cracking under hot water. "Lucy, cut this out." Javier got out of his car. Behind him, Deputy Marcos Estrada of the Fresno County Sheriff's Department, solid, patient, not interested in the theater, walked forward with his hands at his sides. Javier had insisted on the deputy's presence. He'd said it plainly during our prep call. Men like Alvaro always think a woman is bluffing until another man shows up holding paper. "Don't call me that like you still know me," I said. "And don't tell me to cut anything out when you were planning a wedding on assets you never paid for." Javier handed the notice to Alvaro, who stared at the first page without taking it until Deputy Estrada stepped forward and said, flat and final, "Sir, you've been served." Veronica walked toward me before anyone could stop her. She was beautiful in the expensive, arranged way of a woman accustomed to winning rooms before she speaks. Her makeup was perfect. Even now, with the whole dream sagging around her, she was trying to hold the day together by force of posture alone. "Did you know about me the whole time?" she asked. It wasn't the question I expected, and maybe that's why I answered honestly. Not the whole time. When? When the second hotel charge hit a card I paid off. I watched her eyes flicker. When he started showering before Sunday dinners and calling it stress. When he said he had to be at the site late and the cameras showed no one there. When he stopped looking guilty and started looking relieved. She swallowed. "He told me you two were basically over." I held her gaze. "Men like him are always basically over with one woman the minute they need another to believe them." The line landed harder than I intended. Veronica stepped back. I watched the bride in her give way. Not into innocence exactly, but into something rawer and more confused. She hadn't known the whole truth either. She'd been sold a version of Alvaro that he'd constructed on foundations she hadn't been allowed to inspect. Alvaro heard enough and lunged forward. Deputy Estrada stepped between us, one hand raised, voice completely flat. "Sir, don't make this worse." Alvaro jerked back like the word worse had personally insulted him. Then he pointed at my truck, the flatbed, the empty ground, my face, cycling through them like one of them might still contain the old version of me, the one who would dissolve when cornered. "You think humiliating me changes anything?" he said. "No," I said. "The documents changed things. I just stopped hiding them." That's when Veronica's father arrived. I knew him only from engagement photos. A heavy-set man in an expensive blue suit named Hector Villanueva, who owned a chain of equipment dealerships upstate and liked being photographed with his thumbs in his belt loops like a politician in a truck commercial. He stepped out of a black Escalade, surveyed the empty property, then scanned the scene with the slow, deliberate attention of a man who had built a business by identifying exposure before it became loss. His eyes moved from the event planner to the caterer's truck, to Deputy Estrada, to Javier, to his daughter in her ivory dress, to the empty ground, and finally settled on Alvaro. "Why?" he said quietly. "Is there a sheriff's deputy at my daughter's wedding?" Nobody answered fast enough. Veronica turned toward him, and her face was already fracturing. "Dad," he said, "it was all his. There are 1,000 ways a sentence can collapse a man. That one did it in under 10 words." Hector Villanueva's expression moved from confusion to arithmetic. He was no longer processing emotion. He was calculating exposure. "What exactly," he said to Alvaro, with the careful diction of a man who has fired people before and doesn't enjoy it, "belongs to you here?" The silence that followed was not merely the silence of a party gone badly. It was the silence of a lie being held up against paperwork and found too light to survive the comparison. Alvaro opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Javier, at Estrada, at the cleared lot, at Veronica, at Carmen, and then said the single dumbest possible thing. This is a misunderstanding. Hector let out one sharp laugh that contained no humor whatsoever. No, he said. A misunderstanding is a florist arriving with the wrong color roses. This is fraud wrapped in white ribbon. The guests began leaving within 15 minutes, not dramatically. They just backed away from the blast radius with the efficient, self-preserving cowardice people reserve for public disasters they don't want associated with their names. The musicians loaded their speakers back into the van. The caterer refused to unload. The wedding planner started making calls about cancellation fees. The floral company wanted to know where to send the invoice. Veronica's cousin filmed everything until Veronica hissed at her to put the phone away. Carmen argued with anyone who would stand still long enough to hear her. Rocio cried, which would have moved me more if I hadn't once listened to her tell a room full of people that I was lucky Alvaro handled the real business stuff. Veronica didn't cry. That surprised me. She took off her veil, folded it once, then again, then handed it to a bridesmaid without looking. There was something cold and almost admirable in the way she turned back to Alvaro and said very quietly, "How much of your life is mine by accident?" He tried to take her arm. She stepped away before he touched her. The gesture was clean enough to sound like a slap. Deputy Estrada asked everyone not directly involved to clear the access path. Javier asked if I was ready to leave. I looked once more at the lot, the dust, the wreckage of borrowed grandeur, the arch on my flatbed catching afternoon sun, and then I got back in the truck, shifted into gear, and drove away, while his new wedding died behind me in the dirt. The next morning, the internet did what it always does with public humiliation. It fed. Someone had filmed enough of the scene for a clipped, breathless version to start circulating by dawn. Not the full truth. The internet prefers the skeleton of a story it can dress in rumor. By 9 a.m., people were saying a groom got dumped at his own venue, a bride got conned, a wife took back everything, a family business imploded, a wealthy father almost assaulted his son-in-law, a deputy shut down the event, and a woman drove off with the altar itself. The details blurred, the shame stuck. Alvaro called 31 times that day. When I didn't answer, he moved to texts. First rage, then pleading, then threat, then insult, then the exhausted cycling desperation of a man who can't decide whether you're supposed to fear him or rescue him. I screenshotted everything and forwarded it to Javier. By noon, Javier had filed for a temporary protective order citing harassment and property interference. By 3 p.m., Alvaro's access to the warehouse security cameras was revoked permanently. That night, I slept 9 straight hours at my friend Marissa's house, in her guest room with white curtains and a too-soft mattress. It was the first real sleep I'd had in months, maybe longer. I woke up disoriented by the peace. No phone buzzing under my pillow, no tension rehearsed before coffee, no constant low-level calculations about what mood the hallway was in. Sunlight came through the curtains onto the comforter, and I lay there for a while, almost suspicious of it, the way you're suspicious of a pain that suddenly stops. The discovery process with Javier took 6 weeks. We prepared depositions, answered discovery requests, organized ledgers, conducted tracing analyses to show the court exactly where private funds had entered joint ventures and where company-owned assets had been misrepresented as personal property for the purpose of leverage and appearance. Every line item felt like translating a marriage from feeling into math. During one meeting, Javier circled a page and said, "This part matters more than the affair." I looked up from a stack of warehouse invoices. Why? Because infidelity is cruelty, he said. This is structure. This tells a court he built a financial identity on your assets while representing them as his own. Judges get bored by heartbreak. They pay close attention to paper trails. I thought about that for hours. Not because it was comforting, it wasn't, but because it was clarifying. I had spent years trying to understand Alvaro emotionally. Was he insecure, vain, damaged, scared, entitled? The answer, it turned out, was yes to all of it, but none of it mattered as much as what those feelings had become in practice. My marriage didn't fail because he felt the wrong things. It failed because he built the wrong system and expected me to live under it indefinitely without asking what it was costing me. Carmen appeared at my door on a Wednesday with a Costco pie and grief arranged as righteousness. She sat at my dining table with the pie sweating in its plastic dome and told me Alvaro wasn't doing well, that what I'd done at the lot was too much, that public humiliation wasn't justice. I let her finish. Then I said carefully, he announced he was leaving me in front of an audience. He planned his wedding on my assets. He told people I contributed nothing for years. But the first moment he faces public consequences, that's what you call too much. Carmen looked at her hands. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no ready script. The silence stretched until she said very quietly, "I didn't know how much came from you." "No," I said. "You just liked what it looked like coming from him." The pie stayed on the table after she left. I didn't cut it. The divorce hearing began in November. Courtrooms don't look the way television makes them look, because real collapse is quieter and more humiliating than scriptwriters allow. Fluorescent lights, someone coughing in the back, a clerk mispronouncing a name, a lawyer flipping to the wrong exhibit. But beneath all that ordinary machinery, something extraordinary was happening in that room. Alvaro Medina, who had built an identity on volume and performance, was about to meet a space where only documents got the final word. He tried, at first, to sound confident. He said the land had always been a joint venture under his operational leadership. He said I had been helpful with paperwork, but not central to the enterprise. He said the moved assets were understood to be for family use, a phrase so slippery it almost deserved applause for effort. Then Javier began marketing marking exhibits: bank transfer, Exhibit 1, contractor invoice, Exhibit 2, warehouse access authorization, Exhibit 3, equipment title, Exhibit 4, LLC operating schedule, Exhibit 5, tax treatment, Exhibit 6, text message where Alvaro asked me to move money over so the vendor doesn't freak out before my mother's luncheon, Exhibit 7, email where he thanked me for fronting the utility deposit until the next harvest payment hits, Exhibit 8. By Exhibit 12, the confidence had left his body the way air leaves a tire, gradually and then completely. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Whitmore, 22 years on the bench, silver-haired with a stare so dry it could cure leather, asked him a simple question. Mr. Medina, if these assets were yours personally, why did your wife's company insure them, service them, depreciate them, and pay to move them? He opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. That was the moment that broke him. Not because he lost the argument, but because he lost his audience. For once, there was no room he could dominate with tone, no dinner table he could control with charm, no family members nodding along because acknowledging the truth would force them to revisit years of convenient blindness. There was only a judge, a record, and the fluorescent democracy of paperwork. The ruling arrived in pieces, but when the whole of it settled, it was enough. The court ordered reimbursement and accounting adjustments tied to my separate property contributions. It recognized Navarro Ag Solutions as the legal owner of the moved assets. It restrained further interference. It compelled disclosures on outstanding debts. It prohibited unilateral disposition of disputed site interests. It was not a movie ending. Nobody gasped. Nobody applauded. But when I walked out of that courtroom, the future felt less like a cliff and more like a road, rough in places, but going somewhere. Alvaro caught up with me in the hallway. He didn't shout. Men like him save shouting for when they think it might still work. Instead, he lowered his voice and tried to sound devastated, almost philosophical. You really wanted to destroy me. I turned and looked at him. He was thinner than he used to be. The expensive watch was gone. His suit didn't fit right. His eyes had that restless, searching quality people develop when the world stops confirming the version of themselves they preferred. No, I said. You keep mistaking exposure for destruction. He blinked, like the sentence had physically landed somewhere. I wanted to stop being the floor under your feet, I said. You called that betrayal because standing up made you fall. He didn't follow me after that. In March, Javier called me into his office. He slid a packet across the desk with something close to admiration on his face. Inside were records tied to a forged electronic acknowledgement on a vendor refinancing request, one that had listed access to collateral Alvaro didn't control and referenced operational assets already traced to my company. He hadn't just lied socially. He'd lied in ways that banks and commercial insurers find actionable. Can he fix it? I asked. Javier's smile was brief and unpleasant. Not with charm. The referral didn't become a criminal spectacle, at least not publicly. But it did something perhaps worse. It closed doors. Credit tightened. Vendors went cold. A man who had built his entire identity on appearing bigger than his books could support suddenly had to operate in a world where no one extended trust for free. Veronica's father sued separately. Carmen stopped calling. Rocio deleted every engagement photo that had ever featured the lot. By summer, the only people still defending Alvaro were the ones too entangled in their own pride to admit what they'd been applauding for years. Through the town's loose web of practical gossip, I heard he was renting a small apartment above a tire shop on the edge of Madeira, that someone had seen him loading his own groceries, that he'd sold the truck, that he'd tried to pitch a new venture and been shown the door because nobody wanted to finance a man whose primary talent was confusing access with ownership. I didn't celebrate when I heard those things. I just noticed that none of them left a mark. That's how I knew I was healing. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it had stopped asking to be fed every day. By August, Navarro Ag Solutions was no longer a legal structure built to protect me from my marriage. It was my actual work. I leased mobile irrigation systems, contracted site setup equipment to operations that were tired of being overcharged by men who had only ever known how to perform competence. I hired 2 women full-time, both of whom had spent years doing invisible labor for male-run operations, and both of whom smiled the first time I told them to put every single agreement in writing, no exceptions. I named one of the service packages after my father. And then, because life enjoys symmetry when given enough time, the lot came back to me, not as a gift, as math. The final accounting, offsets, reimbursement allocations, and debt exposures left Alvaro with fewer options than he'd spent years bragging he had. His share became costly to hold and impossible to leverage. By October, through a negotiated settlement he could no longer afford to resist, I bought him out of the remaining interest in the disputed property. The same ground where he had planned to marry another woman in front of a borrowed empire came back under my control, not through melodrama, but through documentation and patience. The first time I stood on it alone afterward, the wind was high and dry and honest. I walked the perimeter slowly, boots sinking just enough in the dirt to leave proof. Then I stopped in the center and laughed out loud, a real laugh, surprised and full, because the sound that came out of me was not bitter at all. It was delighted, not at his fall, at my own return. A few weeks later, I brought a crew back to the site. No secret deposits, no performative toasts, no relatives arriving to consume what they hadn't helped build. There were surveyors, electricians, permit binders, honest invoices, and the kind of working silence that belongs to people who are there to make something real. The plan was straightforward. Convert the shell into a seasonal equipment hub hub, training space, and small administrative office for the company. A place that actually matched the work being done, instead of flattering a man who only ever stood in front of it. On the morning we broke ground for the interior retrofit, I climbed back into my father's old truck. The same engine caught with that same familiar rough growl, but the sound meant something different now. The first time it had roared on that lot, it had marked an ending. Today it marked construction. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the steel arch, repainted, repurposed, bolted to a utility trailer. Not as a wedding ornament anymore, but as part of the new entry sign frame. Marissa laughed when she saw my face. "You know this is the pettiest beautiful thing you've ever done, right?" I smiled. "It's called recycling." When the sign went up 3 months later, it read, "Navarro Field Systems" in clean black letters against weathered wood. No mention of him, no hidden dedication, no explanation. At the opening, people came because they were invited, not because they were promised spectacle. Farmers, suppliers, 2 county representatives, Marissa, Javier, the women I'd hired. Even Veronica sent flowers with a card that said only, "You were right about paper." I set the arrangement by the door and let that be enough. Near the end of the afternoon, when the crowd thinned and the winter sun started lowering itself over the fields, I stepped outside alone. The lot that had held dust and humiliation now hummed softly with generators, parked service units, coiled lines, organized inventory, and the mild human chaos of useful work. A forklift beeped somewhere near the back bay. Someone laughed from inside the office. A radio played classic rock too quietly to be annoying. Everything felt grounded, stubbornly real. I thought about the sentence that had started all of this. "When we come back, you won't matter in this house anymore." It was strange how small it sounded now, how pathetic, how revealing. He thought mattering came from being named by him, chosen by him, attached to what he had decided was his. He never understood that I had been mattering all along, in the contracts signed at midnight, in the mortgages paid during bad years, in the equipment maintained, the records kept, the vendors called back, the steadiness he borrowed and renamed masculine confidence. The only thing that changed was that I finally stopped volunteering my own invisibility. Someone inside called my name. I turned toward the building, toward my company, my crew, my work, the lemon trees I'd planted along the side fence last month, the truck that still smelled faintly like my father's aftershave in summer heat. I slipped the keys from my pocket, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine one more time. This time, when the motor caught, it sounded like freedom.
Just before I walked down the aisle, my father slipped me a note. "Fake a fall now." I stumbled on purpose, stopping the wedding. When the ambulance arrived, what he said next shocked me. I stood at the altar in my custom Tom Ford tuxedo, watching Vanessa walk toward me in her $42,000 Vera Wang dress. She looked perfect like always. Blonde hair cascading in those loose waves that photographers loved. That smile, the one that made venture capitalists pull out their checkbooks. The one that had made me fall in love 2 years ago at a tech conference in Austin. 300 guests stood as the string quartet played Pell Bell's Canon. The ceremony was being live-reamed to my company's social media. 84,000 people watching in real time. We were Silicon Valley's power couple, the startup founder, and the marketing genius. Forbes had done a profile on us 3 months ago. The 200 million love story. My father stood beside me as best man. Strange choice, people had said. Usually you pick your college roommate or your business partner, but Dad had insisted, said he wouldn't miss this moment for anything. Vanessa reached the halfway point. The music swelled. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the historic church we'd paid $15,000 to rent. Then Dad leaned close. His hand brushed mine. Something crinkled between our palms. A folded piece of paper. "Read it," he whispered. His voice was tight. "Urgent right now." I unfolded the paper. 5 words in his handwriting. "Fake a fall right now." I looked at him. His face was stone, but his eyes were screaming. "Dad, what? Trust me, son. Fall. Make it dramatic. Do it now." Vanessa was 10 FT'd away. 8 FT'd. Her father, Gerald Morrison, real estate mogul, beaming with pride, walked her forward. Her mother dabbed tears in the front row. The governor was in row 3. My board of directors filled the left side of the church. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. This was my wedding day, the biggest day of my life. We'd spent 9 months planning this, $280,000 on the wedding alone. But something in Dad's voice, that tone he'd used when I was 7, and he'd yanked me back from stepping into traffic without looking. I took 1 step toward Vanessa, extended my hand toward hers, then hooked my shoe on the edge of the carpet runner. I went down hard, shoulder first. My head cracked against the marble altar step. Pain exploded behind my eyes. Real pain. I hadn't planned to hit that hard. The music stopped. Someone screamed, "Trevor!" Vanessa shrieked. She dropped her bouquet. $3,000 worth of white roses and orchids, and ran. But Dad got there first. His head. "He's bleeding. Someone call 911. Dad's voice boomed through the church. I touched my temple. My fingers came away red. Jesus Christ. This wasn't fake anymore. Blood. Actual blood. "Get back!" Dad barked at Vanessa as she tried to kneel beside me. "Give him space. He needs air. I'm his fiancé, Vanessa snapped. Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Trevor, baby, are you okay? Can you hear me? He needs a hospital, Dad said. His voice had that CEO tone, the one that ended board meetings, the one that made investors fall in line. Everyone stay back. Paramedics are coming. He just needs to sit up, Vanessa insisted. She grabbed my arm hard. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin. Trevor, stand up. We can finish the ceremony. You're fine. He's not fine. Dad's voice thundered. Look at his head. He could have a concussion, a skull fracture. It's nothing, Vanessa said, but her voice had changed. Gone was the soft, concerned fiancé. This was something else, something sharp. We've waited 9 months for this. We have 300 guests. The photographer only gave us a 4-hour window. We are not stopping the wedding over a little bump. The church went silent, dead silent. Dad stared at her. My son is bleeding from the head, and you want to finish the ceremony? It's his wedding day. Vanessa's mask was slipping. Her voice went shrill, desperate. He can go to the hospital after. We have vendors' contracts. The reception venue charges $5,000 per hour whether we use it or not. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Uncomfortable shifting. Camera phones coming out. Sirens wailed outside, getting closer. The paramedics burst through the church's double doors 90 seconds later. 2 of them, a woman in her 40s, a man maybe 30. They had a gurney, medical bags. They moved fast. What happened? The woman asked. Her name tag said J. Martinez. He fell, Dad said. Hit his head on the marble step. He's bleeding. Possible concussion. Martinez knelt beside me. Checked my pupils, my pulse, the wound on my temple. We need to transport him, she said. Head injuries are serious, sir. Can you tell me your name? Trevor. Trevor Hawkins. Good. Trevor, we're going to take you to Pacific Medical Center. Get you checked out, okay? They loaded me onto the gurney, started wheeling me toward the doors. I'll ride with him, Vanessa declared. She was following us, her dress trailing, her mother trying to hold her back. No, Dad blocked her path. His 6.2 frame filled the doorway. Next of kin only. I'm about to be next of kin, Vanessa shouted. Her face was red, twisted, nothing like the woman I'd proposed to. I'm his wife, but you're not. Not yet. Dad climbed into the ambulance beside me. You stay here. Handle the guests. Explain what happened. You can't do this. Vanessa's voice turned vicious, wild. Trevor, tell him I'm coming with you. The doors slammed. The lock clicked. The ambulance pulled away, sirens screaming. I'm Trevor Hawkins, 36 years old, founder and CEO of Streamline Analytics, a data optimization platform that had just raised $47 million in Series B funding. I'd built the company from nothing. 7 years of 18-hour days, sleeping in the office, eating ramen, pitching to investors who told me my idea would never work until it did. We'd signed contracts with Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Our platform was processing 3 billion data points daily. Revenue was projected to hit $80 million this year, and Vanessa had been there for the last 2 years of it. I'd met her at TechCrunch Disrupt in Austin. She was working for a marketing agency, she'd said specialized in brand development for startups. She'd approached me at the networking mixer after my panel on AI-driven analytics. Your presentation was brilliant, she'd said, smiled that smile. But your marketing is terrible. Excuse me. Your company website looks like it was built in 2005. Your social media is non-existent. Your brand message is confusing. She'd handed me her card. Vanessa Morrison, brand strategy consultant. I can fix that if you're interested. I'd been interested. She'd overhauled our entire brand in 6 weeks. New website, social media strategy, press releases. She'd gotten us featured in TechCrunch, Wired, and Fast Company. Our brand recognition had tripled. And somewhere in those late-night strategy sessions, between the coffee runs and the whiteboard brainstorming, we'd fallen in love. Or I had anyway. She was brilliant, beautiful, connected. She knew everyone in Silicon Valley, introduced me to investors, got us invitations to exclusive events, made me look good in front of the media. You're my muse, I told her the night I proposed. Rooftop restaurant, champagne, a $45,000 engagement ring. You made all of this possible. We made it possible, she'd corrected, together. The wedding planning had been intense. Vanessa insisted on perfection. The right venue, the right photographer, the right flowers. Everything had to be Instagram-worthy, shareable, part of our brand. This isn't just our wedding, she'd explained. It's a statement. It shows investors we're stable, committed, serious people building serious things. I'd agreed. Let her handle everything. Signed the checks, showed up to the tastings and venue tours. My father had been skeptical from the beginning. Something's off about her, he'd said 6 months ago over dinner. Just the 2 of us. Steakhouse in Palo Alto. I can't put my finger on it. You can't put your finger on it because there's nothing to find. I'd said defensive. She's amazing. She's helped build this company. Has she? Or has she just taken credit for your work? Dad, I'm just saying. Be careful when someone's too perfect, too eager, too convenient. There's usually a reason. I dismissed it. Told myself he was being overprotective, that he couldn't accept I was getting married, moving on with my life. But now lying in the back of that ambulance, blood trickling down my face, I wasn't so sure. Dad, I said quietly. The siren covered our conversation. Martinez was in back with us checking my vitals, but the engine noise made it hard to hear. What the hell is going on? Dad pulled out his phone, opened a folder, started scrolling through photos, text messages, bank statements, legal documents, court records. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, Dad said. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that meant something terrible was coming. Remember David Chen? Works out of San Francisco. Former FBI, 23 years investigating financial crimes. I knew David. He'd consulted for my company on a security audit. I had a feeling about Vanessa. Dad continued. Something wasn't adding up. She was too perfect, too eager to get married, too focused on the timeline. My stomach dropped. What did you find? Dad handed me the phone. The first photo was a marriage certificate from Clark County, Nevada, dated 3 years ago. Vanessa Morrison married to Julian Garcia. She's already married, Dad said, to a guy named Julian Garcia, investment banker. They've run this scam 4 times before. I stared at the photo. Vanessa in a simple dress, different hair, standing next to a man I'd never seen, smiling that same smile. It's a marriage fraud scheme, Dad explained. They target wealthy men in tech. Vanessa plays the brilliant marketing consultant. Julian stays in the background. They get married. Bigamy technically, since she never divorces Julian. Then 6 months later, Julian files charges. Vanessa files for annulment, claiming she didn't know about the first marriage. But by then, community property laws have kicked in. She walks away with half of everything you acquired during the marriage. My brain couldn't process it, couldn't make sense of it. She loved me. She loved your Series B funding. Dad's voice was gentle, sad. Look at the next photo. Email chains. Vanessa and Julian planning everything, discussing asset division, calculating my net worth, laughing about the mark, falling for the fake pregnancy scare 2 months ago that had turned out to be nothing. He actually cried when I told him about the miscarriage Vanessa had written. This is going to be our easiest target yet. The paramedic looked over. Sir, your heart rate just spiked. Are you okay? I'm fine, I whispered, but I wasn't. My hands were shaking. My vision kept going gray. The other victims, Dad said. David tracked them down. Software engineer in Seattle lost $2.3 million. Cryptocurrency founder in Austin, $4.7 million. Biotech CEO in San Diego. His company went bankrupt during the divorce. He lost everything. More photos, more evidence, hotel receipts showing Vanessa and Julian meeting regularly, bank records showing money being funneled into offshore accounts, text messages discussing the wedding timeline. Push for summer, Julian had written. The longer he waits, the more suspicious he gets. We need that marriage certificate. I'm trying, Vanessa had replied. He wanted to wait until Q3 because of the product launch. I convinced him June was better. Julian was in the church today, Dad said. Row 14. Dark suit, beard, wire, rim, glasses. He was recording everything on his phone. They need video proof of the ceremony for their lawsuit. I felt like I was going to vomit. All of it was fake. All 2 years. All of it. The ambulance pulled into the emergency bay at Pacific Medical Center. Through the window, I could see news vans. Someone had tipped them off. My phone was exploding with notifications. The live stream had captured everything. Vanessa screaming about photographers and contracts while I bled on the marble floor. The internet was already tearing her apart. How did you know? I asked as they wheeled me toward the ER doors. How did you know to check? Dad looked at me. His eyes were sad, tired. Son, I've spent 42 years building companies, negotiating deals, reading people. I know a hostile takeover when I see one. He paused, and 3 weeks ago, she made a mistake. Asked me about your stock options. Very specific questions about vesting schedules, exit strategies, what happens to equity in a divorce. She said she was just curious, trying to understand the business. That's what she wanted you to think. But nobody asks those questions unless they're planning for a specific outcome. The ER doors opened. Fluorescent lights, antiseptic smell, nurses and scrubs. Mr. Hawkins, a doctor, approached. Young, maybe 35. Name tag said, Dr. Patricia Torres, emergency medicine. I'm Dr. Torres, let's get you checked out. They wheeled me into a bay, started running tests, CT scan, neurological exam, cleaned the wound on my temple. 4 stitches, they said. My phone kept buzzing. 53 missed calls, mostly Vanessa. Some from her parents, some from wedding guests, and one from a number I didn't recognize. Dad was on his phone in the corner, calm, methodical, making calls. Arthur James Hawkins, I need you to file paperwork immediately. Asset freeze on every account Vanessa Morrison has touched. Full forensic audit, restraining order, and I need you to contact Agent Wilson at the FBI. Yes, the marriage fraud case. Tell him we have video evidence. Tell him Julian Garcia was at the church today. Yes, we have him on camera. Arthur Richardson, my attorney, 30 years of practice, handled all my corporate legal work. Dr. Torres came back with results. No skull fracture, mild concussion. You'll need rest. No screens for 48 hours. Follow up with your primary care physician in a week. Can I leave in about an hour? We want to monitor you a bit longer. My phone rang again. The unknown number. Dad looked at it. Don't answer that. Who is it? Probably Julian trying to feel out the situation, but I answered anyway. Put it on speaker. Trevor Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins. A man's voice. Smooth. Professional. This is Agent Kevin Wilson, FBI. I'm calling regarding Vanessa Morrison and Julian Garcia. Dad moved closer. Agent Wilson. James Hawkins. Trevor's father. We've been in contact with your office. Yes, sir. Mr. Chen sent over the preliminary evidence this morning. We've been building this case for 8 months. You're the 5th victim to come forward. 5th, I said. Vanessa and Julian have been running this scam since 2019. We estimate they've stolen approximately approximately $14 million across 7 victims, but most victims don't report it. They're too embarrassed. They sign with NDAs to make it go away quietly. My hands were shaking again. So, what happens now? We have warrants for both of them. Marriage fraud across state lines is federal. Wire fraud, identity theft. We've been waiting for the right moment to move. Today's wedding was perfect. Julian was there on camera participating in the scheme. We have surveillance video. Your live stream gave us everything we needed. Where are they now? We arrested Julian outside the church 45 minutes ago. We're picking up Vanessa at the reception venue in approximately 10 minutes. The line clicked. Hold music played. Dad squeezed my shoulder. It's over. She can't touch you. Can't touch the company. She's done. How long have you known? I asked. How long have you been working with the FBI? 3 weeks, since David found the first marriage certificate. I contacted Agent Wilson immediately. He asked me to let the wedding proceed. Said they needed evidence of both of them working together. Said it would strengthen the case, so I was bait. You were protected. I wasn't going to let you actually marry her. That's why I gave you the note. That's why I insisted on being best man so I could stop it at the last second. Agent Wilson came back on the line. Mr. Hawkins, we have Vanessa in custody. She's being transported to the San Francisco field office now. You'll need to come in and give a formal statement. Tomorrow is fine. Bring your attorney. What about the wedding guests? The media? We'll handle that. We're issuing a press release in 1 hour. This is a major case for us. White-collar crime, high-profile defendants. It's going to be national news. He wasn't wrong. By that evening, the story was everywhere. CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, Silicon Valley wedding scam exposed. Tech CEO saved from marriage fraud by father's last-minute intervention. The live stream clip, Vanessa screaming about photographers while I bled on the floor, had 3.7 million views. Twitter was destroying her. Reddit had 11 different threads analyzing every detail. Someone found photos of the previous victims, created a timeline, mapped out the entire scam. Vanessa's social media accounts were deleted within 2 hours, but screenshots lived forever. People found the fake pregnancy texts, the emails discussing asset division, everything. Julian's investment banking firm released a statement. We terminated Mr. Garcia's employment effective immediately. His actions do not reflect the values of our organization. Vanessa's parents issued a statement through their lawyer. We had no knowledge of our daughter's alleged criminal activities. We are devastated and cooperating fully with authorities. My board of directors sent flowers to my hospital room. Take all the time you need. The note said, we're here for you. I spent that night in the hospital observation for the concussion. Dad stayed with me. We didn't talk much. Just sat there watching the news coverage, processing what had happened. I'm sorry, Dad said around midnight, for putting you through that, for making you fall, for not telling you sooner. You saved my life. I almost cost you your company. If I'd been wrong, if she'd been legitimate, you'd hate me forever. But you weren't wrong. No, but I was terrified. I was right up until the moment you hit that floor. My phone kept buzzing. Messages from friends, colleagues, investors. Everyone had seen the news. Dude, are you okay? Holy? I can't believe this. I always thought something was off about her. You dodged a major bullet. One message stood out from Derek Walsh, my college roommate, the guy who should have been my best man. Your dad is a bossing hero. Also, I'm sorry I ever doubted him. Drinks on me when you're recovered. At 2:17 a.m., Arthur Richardson called. Trevor, I've completed the preliminary audit. Vanessa accessed your account 17 times over the past 6 months. Small transfers, nothing large enough to trigger alerts. She moved approximately $340,000 into offshore accounts. $340,000. We can recover most of it. The FBI is freezing everything connected to the case, but it's going to take time. What about the wedding costs? Non-reoverable. The vendors were legitimate. They fulfilled their contracts. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, all paid. You're out approximately $280,000 on the wedding itself. It didn't matter. Not really. Not compared to what I could have lost. The formal FBI interview happened 3 days later. Arthur came with me. We spent 4 hours going through everything. Timeline, financial records, text messages, emails. Agent Wilson was mid-40s, former prosecutor. He'd been tracking marriage fraud cases for 12 years. Vanessa and Julian are looking at 15 to 20 years, he said. Federal sentences, no parole. This was sophisticated, organized. They planned everything down to the last detail, except they didn't plan on my father. I said, no, they underestimated him. That's what ultimately brought them down. What about the other victims? We're contacting all of them, offering them the chance to testify. Most will probably accept deals. They'll get some restitution. Avoid the publicity. But this case, it's going to trial. We want to make an example. The trial was set for 8 months later. Federal Court, San Francisco. I testified for 6 hours. Told the jury everything. The relationship, the proposal, the wedding planning, the note from my father, the fall, the ambulance, the revelation. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Vanessa Morrison, 18 years federal prison. Julian Garcia, 22 years federal prison. Restitution ordered 11. $4 million to be split among all victims. 6 months after the trial, I'm sitting in my office. The company is doing better than ever. We just closed our Series C, $120 million. Valuation hit $800 million. We rebranded. New website, new marketing strategy. This time I hired a reputable firm with verified credentials and references. My father father retired last month, sold his company. He calls every Sunday. We talk about business, life, the future. Have you dated anyone? He asked last week. No, not ready. Take your time. There's no rush. How did you know? I asked him. Really? How did you know to check? He was quiet for a moment. She asked the wrong question at the wrong time, and she didn't react right when I tested her. Tested her at Christmas dinner. Remember I mentioned my estate planning, said I was updating my will. She asked very specific questions about inheritance law, survivorship rights, spousal benefits. That could have been normal curiosity. It wasn't the questions. It was the intensity, the focus. She wasn't making conversation. She was gathering intelligence. So, you knew? I suspected. That's when I hired David, and David confirmed everything. The wedding ring I'd bought her, that $45,000 engagement ring, was seized as evidence, eventually sold at auction. Proceeds went to the victim's restitution fund. The wedding venue sent me a refund. Unexpected. A gesture of goodwill after the media attention. $15,000. I donated it to a non-profit that helps fraud victims. My inbox still has Vanessa's emails. I haven't deleted them. Can't quite bring myself to. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I read through them, looking for signs, for red flags I missed. They're all there, hidden in plain sight. The way she pushed for joint bank accounts. The way she asked about stock options. The way she insisted on a summer wedding. The way she panicked when I fell. Not because she cared if I was hurt, but because the ceremony was failing. I missed it all. But Dad didn't. Last week someone sent me a message on LinkedIn. A woman named Rachel Torres. Subject line, "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. You don't know me, but I was one of Vanessa Morrison's victims. My ex-husband was her second mark. We lost our company in the divorce. Lost everything. I've been rebuilding for 3 years. When I heard about your case, about the FBI investigation, about your father stopping the wedding, I cried because someone finally fought back. Someone finally exposed them. Thank you for testifying. Thank you for going public. Thank you for making sure they couldn't do this to anyone else. You saved countless future victims. Rachel, I read that message 5 times, printed it, put it on my office wall because that's what matters. Not the money I lost, not the embarrassment, not the fact that I fell for a con artist. What matters is that she's in prison, that Julian's in prison, that they can't destroy anyone else's life. My father saw through her when I couldn't. He handed me a note that said 5 words, fake a fall right now. And those 5 words saved everything. The wedding that never happened. The marriage that would have destroyed me. The scam that ended with justice instead of ruin. People ask me if I'm angry, if I hate Vanessa for what she did. I'm not angry, not anymore. I'm grateful because the fall that stopped my wedding saved my life, and the father who made me stumble caught me before I fell too far to recover.